Hi, I'm Kayla. I showed up to my own family dinner and found no chair with my name on it. No one even looked surprised, just annoyed that I came. My aunt told the room I wasn't worthy of a seat. My cousin laughed like it was a joke. But then Grandpa stood up, and everything they tried to hide began to fall apart. Why did it take a public humiliation for them to finally hear my name? I slowed the car as I turned into the long, curved driveway of the Hamilton estate. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound too familiar, too precise. The iron gate had already been left open, like they knew I'd come, though no one ever said I should. No one told me not to, either. That ambiguity said everything. The oak trees lining the path hadn't changed, their twisted arms reaching across like they still remembered what I'd tried to forget. I hadn't been here in 5 years. The last time, my father was still alive. And even then, I hadn't stayed long. The house came into view, its grandeur still cold, its symmetry more severe than beautiful. You could photograph it for a real estate brochure, but you'd never call it home. Not if you were me. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as I parked near the front entrance. I turned off the ignition but didn't move. The truth was, I hadn't been invited by name. A vague family group text had mentioned the annual dinner, and something in me, some part not yet burned out, said, "Go." Maybe it was my father's voice. Maybe it was foolish hope. But I came. I stepped out, adjusted the sleeves of my blazer, and smoothed the front of my dress. Charleston's spring air was gentle, the kind that usually comforted me. But not tonight. Tonight, even the breeze felt hesitant. As I walked toward the front door, I glanced at the old oak near the gate, the one my father planted the year I was born. A memory pressed in, him lifting me to touch its first leaves. "This tree will outlive us all," he'd said. Maybe he was right. Maybe it already had. Inside, the air shifted the moment I crossed the threshold. My heels clicked on the polished wood, but no one turned. Conversations dipped only slightly before recovering with practiced smiles. A distant cousin took my coat without meeting my eyes. I said thank you anyway. The hallway smelled of lavender and old decisions. Familiar faces milled about, their greetings saved for those more expected. I scanned the display near the entrance, a glossy board listing attendees and seating arrangements. My name wasn't there. Roxalana, Abarella, even cousin Micah. But not me. A little girl in a ruffled dress tugged her mother's hand and whispered, "Who's that lady?" The mother glanced at me, then looked away, offering no answer. I caught sight of Aunt Sophrona near the fireplace, whispering something to a man I didn't recognize. Her eyes cut to me, then back to her conversation. They both laughed. I moved through the crowd as if I were the ghost of myself, hovering but unacknowledged. Then I approached the reception table. A half-empty glass of champagne sat unattended beside a decorative bowl of mints. That's when I heard it. "She doesn't even deserve a seat at this dinner." The words weren't shouted. They were dropped like poison, casual and cruel. Sophrona's voice was unmistakable, sharp, rehearsed. Laughter followed. I couldn't tell who joined in. Maybe Cousin Belle, maybe one of the aunts. It didn't matter. I stopped mid-step. Had I misheard? My ears burned. My breath caught. The room didn't pause. No gasps, no apologies. Just the hum of people pretending everything was as it should be. My instinct was to turn around and walk out. I'd done it before, fled from family gatherings with the grace of a woman too tired to explain. But I didn't. I stood there, letting the sentence settle. This wasn't about a chair. It was about presence, about permission, about being erased while fully visible. The weight of old gatherings came rushing back. Birthdays where my name was skipped, holiday dinners where my achievements were omitted, conversations I'd never been invited into. I stayed upright, not out of pride, but out of defiance. They were watching, even when they pretended not to be. I walked to the place card table. Dozens of names were arranged in alphabetical order, printed in gold ink on folded cardstock. I searched the entire row. Nothing. But then I saw it, tucked in the corner of the table, half under the silver tray of extra cutlery. A sticky note, handwritten, +1. No name, just a scribble. I picked it up, folded it once, and slipped it into my palm. Behind me, someone muttered, "We weren't sure you were coming, or if you'd still fit in." I turned slightly, met their eyes, and said evenly, "I didn't come to fit in. I came because it was time." I moved toward the dining room. The air there was thicker, perfumed with expensive candles and the scent of roasted meat. Each table was decorated with low floral arrangements, place settings with calligraphed name cards. People were settling in, finding their seats like dancers in a well-rehearsed ballet. I stood just outside the circle of elegance, watching how easily everyone moved within it. I thought of my work, months spent in flood zones, organizing relief drives, flying back and forth between regions where roofs had collapsed and people had lost everything. Just last year, Forbes did a profile on our nonprofit, but here, at this table, none of it counted. Sometimes the hardest table to earn a seat at is the one where you were born. I didn't know where I'd heard that quote. Maybe I made it up. Either way, it rang true. I'd spent years proving my worth elsewhere because home never asked. Tonight, though, I wasn't leaving early. I wasn't bowing out. I wasn't fading into the hallway. I stepped forward. There was a seat near the end of one table. It was empty. No name card. No indication it was taken. I walked toward it, clutch in hand, spine straight. Just as I reached for the chair, a manicured hand reached faster. Roxalana. She placed her hand on the back of the chair and smiled sweetly, teeth white and polite. "Oh, that's reserved. Surely you understand." My fingers tightened slightly. My jaw did the same. A pause. Then I smiled back. "Of course. I always do." Roxalana's smile lingered just long enough to make it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was choreography. The way her hand wrapped over the back of the chair, her tone laced with syrup and superiority. "Surely you understand." As if I were being invited into a secret I should be grateful to hear. I didn't respond at first. I scanned the room. No one looked at me, not directly, but they had all heard it. My gaze moved from table to table, not a single glance returned. Just the hush of discomfort people wear like expensive perfume at these kinds of events. Something that's meant to disguise, not resolve. Inside, a dry kind of ache crept up my throat. Not sadness, not even anger. Just the realization that this wasn't the first time the ground shifted beneath me. It was just the first time they'd literally pulled the chair from under me without apology. And I didn't leave. I didn't bolt like I used to. Back in college, when I'd show up to family holidays, be called eccentric or difficult, and vanish before dessert. No, I stood there, chin up, eyes level. If they wanted to play hierarchy, I wasn't folding. Roxalana slid into the chair, crossing one leg over the other with the poise of a woman who never had to prove she belonged. I watched the others nod, pretending nothing happened, as though reclaiming a seat from a sister was as casual as adjusting silverware. An older cousin, Jared, passed behind me and patted the back of the chair, looking right through me. "You know how these things are," he said with a smirk, then turned his attention to Roxalana as if that moment had never belonged to me at all. I pressed my lips into a polite smile, not for them, but for myself. I wasn't giving them the show they wanted. I wasn't going to be the dramatic one again. I stood behind the chair, not moving. I let them squirm, just a little. They want me to retreat. That's their comfort zone. So I stayed, silent, tall, present. Eventually, I walked away, deliberately, unhurried, and found myself near the side tables, where staff hovered discreetly, aligning wine bottles, rearranging floral centerpieces. As I passed, a young man in a black vest brushed past me, paused, then looked back. "I'm sorry, are you staff or guest?" he asked, his tone not unkind but unsure. That question landed harder than it should have. For a split second, I froze, not out of offense, but because of how unsurprising it was. I smiled, thinly. "Guest. Unfortunately." He blinked, apologized, and nodded before walking away. I stood there, alone in a room I grew up in, and realized I had become unplaceable, even to strangers. People who didn't know me couldn't tell if I belonged, because my own family had worked so hard to make me invisible. And then, the coat. A woman walked in, early 50s, clearly a friend of the family, her expression mildly frazzled. She headed straight toward me and handed me her shawl. "Would you mind hanging this up for me, sweetheart?" Before I could respond, another voice chimed in. "Could we get another glass of champagne over here?" They weren't asking the server. They were asking me. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I simply walked to the far end of the room and found a spot near the tall window, the one overlooking the gardens. I stood there, watching as laughter bubbled up around candlelit tables. Behind me, I heard someone murmur, "Oh, I thought she worked for the caterer." I said nothing, but in my mind I answered, "Maybe I do. Maybe I've spent a lifetime catering to your comfort by stepping out of frame." I stayed by that window while the toast began. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the formal portion of the night. People raised their glasses. One by one, speakers stood to say a few words about legacy, family, unity. I remained standing, still without a seat. No one offered me one. Instead, they gave my place to a child, literally. One of the cousin's kids, a bubbly 9-year-old with a bow bigger than her head, was placed in the very seat I had nearly claimed earlier. "She's a better fit anyway," someone said with a chuckle. "It's better filled that way." My clutch felt heavier in my hand. I imagined a comeback, something sharp, something final. But I swallowed it. That was the old me, quicker to cut than to endure. And then I remembered something I'd once read in an old interview with Madeleine Albright. "If you bite back every time you're insulted," she'd said, "you'll starve before dessert." I took a deep breath. Not now, not yet. The sting didn't mean defeat. It meant preparation. I scanned the room again. Every familiar face now felt like a photograph that had faded from memory. I knew their birthdays, their favorite wines, the names of their spouses and children. Yet tonight, they looked at me like a relic, something irrelevant. Somewhere deep, I wondered how many of them believed I'd abandoned the family, that I'd gone off to build some distant, self-important life. The truth was, I'd stopped showing up when I realized I was only ever tolerated, not invited. "You may not control all the events that happen to you," Maya Angelou's voice echoed in my memory, "but you can decide not to be reduced by them." That line had saved me more than once. Tonight, I held on to it like a compass. They might not offer me a chair, but they weren't going to erase my voice. The program ended. Dessert was announced. Plates were cleared. Candles burned lower. I glanced at the sticky note I had folded earlier, the pathetic excuse for a name card. I unfolded it slowly, the ink already smudging. I walked to the head table, calmly, without drawing attention, and placed the note dead center. I looked at Roxalana across the room. She met my gaze, just for a second. "Seems someone forgot to reserve my seat," I said aloud, clear and firm. Silence spread like ink in water. Roxalana's mouth opened, likely to smooth things over. But I didn't wait. I turned, walked through the archway, and toward the garden. Not escaping. Not this time. The garden smelled like lemon verbena and honeysuckle, a scent that hadn't changed in decades. I stepped out onto the terrace beneath strings of old fairy lights, their glow warm but distant. The chatter and clinking glasses behind me faded with every step I took toward the darkened edge of the lawn. I needed space, not from people, but from the performance. I'd played the role of gracious black sheep long enough tonight. I stood still, eyes on the horizon where the trees kissed the dusky sky. My heart thudded with a rhythm I couldn't slow. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, hoping the southern air would steady me. It didn't. Sometimes you leave the room to breathe. Sometimes it's to keep from screaming. And I wasn't ready to scream. Not yet. The soft rustle of dresses and footsteps behind me signaled company. I stayed rooted, hoping whoever it was would sense I wasn't in the mood. No such luck. Belle's voice rose from behind me, bright and bubbly. Oh my gosh, y'all remember how Kayla used to beg Dad to take her with us on those weekends? You'd be like, "Daddy, can I come too? I promise I'll be good." Laughter followed, genuine, hearty laughter from 3 other cousins, and I knew they thought they were being charming, that it was some kind of sweet nostalgia. I turned slightly, enough to see Belle leaning against the railing, mimicking me as a 7-year-old. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My pulse did all the talking, loud, persistent, furious. They kept going. She'd be clutching that ugly stuffed owl like it was going to give her VIP access to the boat. Poor thing never got it. Another cousin added, "Roxalana always got the spot, didn't she?" I walked past them, slowly, deliberately. Not a single word, not even a look. But inside, I unraveled. They didn't know I remembered every one of those weekends. Dad telling me I was too sensitive for boat life. Mom saying I'd get in the way. And Roxalana, always already packed, humiliation cloaked as memory is still humiliation. I kept walking until I reached the back of the garden where the lights barely touched. A wooden bench waited under a magnolia tree, its petals already falling in the breeze. I sat down, the wood creaking slightly beneath me, and exhaled for what felt like the first time that day. In the quiet, I thought of my father. The last real conversation we had. Not small talk, not charity updates. Real. He'd leaned over our kitchen table, his hand resting gently over mine, and said, "Sometimes, silence is the only protection you get in this family." At the time, I didn't fully understand. Now I felt the weight of every syllable. Had he known what I'd face? Had he been warning me? Or apologizing? A twig snapped behind me. I looked up. Sophrona. "Little KK," she chirped, her voice bright as ever. "Hiding again? Just like old times." The words hit with surgical precision. That nickname, KK, was a scar I hadn't spoken aloud in years. I hated it. Always had. It was a tool, a leash, a way to keep me from growing up in their eyes. I smiled faintly and stood. "It's cute how you still think you know me," I said evenly, not giving her the satisfaction of offense. She blinked, maybe expecting sass or retreat. Instead, I walked past her without another word, but inside, I screamed. They didn't know me. Not anymore. And the truth was, maybe they never had. They needed me to be the quiet one, the obedient shadow, the underestimated woman who never fought back. I used to oblige. Not anymore. Back near the terrace, I spotted Roxalana standing with 2 guests, laughing softly. Her laugh dropped off as soon as she saw me walking up. She dismissed the others with a nod and stepped toward me, a glass of white wine in hand. "You okay?" she asked, tone dipped in performance. "You seemed tense." I looked at her, calm. "I'm just watching how the past never stays buried in this house." Her eyes flickered, a crack in her well-rehearsed exterior. "Don't let old ghosts ruin your night," she said smoothly, a smirk tugging at her lip. "You're not a kid anymore." No, I replied, but some people still treat me like one. We stood in silence. Two sisters, raised in the same house, shaped by different truths. She turned first. I let her walk away. I returned to the bench, this time with resolve rather than refuge. My mind replayed every insult, every dismissal, every quiet moment where I swallowed pain instead of speaking it. And then the words of Eleanor Roosevelt came to me like a balm. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I'd given them that permission for too long. Tonight, I was done granting it. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming narrative, my story, my worth, my space, and it wouldn't come in the form of a shout or a scene. It would be strategy, precision, power without the performance. The version of me they'd grown comfortable with no longer existed. They just didn't know it yet. I stood, adjusted my dress, and made my way back toward the dining room. The lights were dimming. The toast was about to begin. My silhouette stretched across the floor as I entered, unapologetic, unmissable. I may not have a seat, but they were about to hear me anyway. I walked back into the dining hall like I belonged there, even if no one else believed it. The shift in energy was almost imperceptible, just enough to feel the tension tighten around the clinking of wine glasses and the low murmur of polite conversation. The lights had dimmed slightly. Waitstaff moved like shadows between tables, filling half-empty glasses and clearing appetizer plates with quiet precision. I passed by 3 tight clusters of guests, all deep in conversation, their eyes flickering toward me before quickly darting away. No one called my name, no one offered me a seat, but I noticed the way their voices dropped just slightly as I moved through. My name wasn't being welcomed, it was being dissected, whispered in tones too soft to quote, but loud enough to feel. I remained standing. The MC tapped the mic, causing feedback that made everyone glance toward the projection screen. If everyone would please take their seats, we're going to begin the tribute video. Chairs shuffled, wine glasses chimed. I stayed still, watching them all sink into their places like well-trained dancers performing the family's favorite routine. I didn't sit. I wouldn't. They needed to see me, to remember I existed. The screen glowed white, then faded into a slow piano intro over the first image, a black and white portrait of my father from his college years, followed by a series of soft transitions, him at various fundraisers, handshakes with local officials, charity events that I remembered attending. But I wasn't in any of them. I leaned forward slightly. Maybe they'd save the family photos for later. The next frame showed a lake house photo, one I recognized instantly. I'd painted the porch railings in that shot. I'd picked out the chairs. But in the picture? Just Roxalana, sun hat tilted just right, raising a glass with our father. The caption read, "A legacy of vision." Frame after frame rolled. A wedding, a christening, a family beach trip. Not one image included me, not even in the background. One cousin appeared 5 times. Roxalana, she was in nearly every second shot. Her smile, always perfect, her pose, always centered. Me, I was nowhere, erased, not by accident, but by design. When the final image faded, applause filled the room. Someone near the front gave a loud, enthusiastic clap, like they'd just watched a political campaign reel. The MC cleared his throat, thanked the guests for their attention, and transitioned smoothly into reading the names of contributors to the estate's restoration. I stayed still, napkin clenched tightly in my lap, resisting the urge to shred it into useless ribbons. From my position near the wall, I could see a few distant relatives glance my way, half pity, half confusion, but the core figures, Roxalana, Sophrona, Abarella, Their expressions were undisturbed, comfortable. And finally, the MC said, "We'd like to give special thanks to Kay." The microphone shrieked with feedback, cutting him off abruptly. The projector screen flashed, then switched to a slideshow of food, main course highlights, signature cocktails, desserts to come. The crowd laughed politely at the technical glitch, and the applause resumed prematurely. No one noticed that my name was never finished. No one asked, but I noticed. I looked directly toward the tech table. Roxalana stood beside the technician, her hand lightly touching his shoulder, leaning in close, whispering something with a smile on her lips. It wasn't an accident. It was a rehearsal, a carefully coordinated performance in omission. The applause lingered like static. I walked forward, slow and deliberate, toward the MC as he stepped down. I leaned in quietly. Was my segment cut, I asked, my tone calm, or did it simply never exist? He blinked, flustered, adjusting his tie. There were some last-minute changes, timing issues. I wasn't— It's fine, I interrupted gently before he stumbled further. I was just curious. I turned and walked back to where I had been standing. Not a word more, not an outburst. Just enough. Enough for him to remember I asked, enough for others to wonder why. I didn't need to beg for space. I'd take it. As the next speaker took the stage, I found myself drifting in memory. My father again, this time not in a photo, but real, vivid, sitting on the back porch with me when I was 10, handing me a box wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside had been an old film camera, scratched and slightly faded. He'd said, "Use this. Make sure the right people are remembered." He meant it metaphorically, of course, but right now, those words burned. My memories hadn't been wiped, just everything else. They could cut my image, they could snip my name, but they couldn't take what I remembered. And I remembered it all, the sweat of setting up fundraiser tents, the hours spent organizing logistics for family charities, the emergency meeting where I restructured a deal that saved our grandfather's vineyard. I made a list in my mind. Every task, every project, every moment they'd claimed without credit. I wasn't collecting receipts. I was counting reasons. The room buzzed with fresh small talk. Dessert was being served, the scent of vanilla and burnt sugar mingling with the sharp aroma of disappointment I wore like perfume. I walked to the side table where the printed programs were laid out. Clean ivory cardstock. Again, my name was missing. I pulled a Sharpie from my clutch. With careful precision, I turned one program over and wrote, "Kayla Elise Hamilton." Underneath it, in smaller letters, "Present." Then I placed it on the head table, smack in the middle. I didn't wait for anyone to notice. I didn't explain it. I just walked out to the hallway again, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. And as I reached the doors, I whispered to myself, if they won't say my name, I will leave it where they can't ignore it. After leaving the program marked with my name at the head table, I made my way to the back of the room. Roxalana had already begun her speech, standing beneath the spotlight like it was born for her. The air had thickened. Servers moved slower now, as if sensing the shift in energy. I crossed my arms and leaned gently against the back wall, gaze fixed. "Let's see how long they can pretend I'm not standing right here," I whispered under my breath. The smell of roasted duck still hung in the air, but I couldn't taste anything. All I felt was steel in my gut, sharp, cold resolve. Roxalana's voice carried with the ease of someone practiced in charm. "This initiative was born from a place of deep love for our community," she said, gesturing toward a glossy display board. 2 years ago, we saw devastation from the hurricane, and we knew Hamiltons don't stand by. My jaw tightened. She pointed to a collage of volunteers, supply trucks, construction sites. I recognized every frame. I had taken those photographs. I had coordinated those supply drops. That was my project, my people, my work. And yet, the plaque beneath read, led by Roxalana Hamilton and team. I didn't blink, but my body burned. I felt someone shift beside me. "Didn't you start that?" a cousin whispered, not unkindly. I didn't turn my head. "Started it, funded it, finished it." He said nothing more. My hands trembled slightly, hidden under folded arms. I kept my face still. This wasn't the moment to erupt. That's what they expected. The emotional sister, the unstable one. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. They want me angry, I thought. They want me impulsive. I'll be calculated instead. The applause that followed was loud, enthusiastic. A few guests stood. Roxalana stepped down from the podium with practiced grace, her smile unwavering. People leaned in around their tables to gush over her speech, over her vision. A man I barely remembered turned to me and said, "You must be proud of your sister. She's done such incredible things." I looked at him, smiled. She certainly knows how to own a spotlight. He nodded as if I'd complimented her, completely missing the edge in my tone. From across the room, I caught the tail end of a conversation between two servers, one saying, "It's funny though, I handled all the checks. Hers wasn't on any of them." I didn't react, just filed it away. I walked toward the back of the room where certificates and awards were displayed on tall easels. One caught my eye, a framed recognition labeled Platinum Donor C. Hamilton. I stepped closer. Something felt off. The formatting was wrong, the lettering different from what I'd submitted. I lifted the frame slowly. Taped behind it, still visible through the back panel, was the original certificate. It read, "Platinum Benefactor, Kayla Elise Hamilton. My name, erased again." "Just a formatting error?" Abarella's voice startled me. She had appeared beside me, faux concern draped across her features like her overpriced shawl. I turned the frame toward her. "Funny how formatting errors only ever erase me." Her mouth opened, but I didn't stay for the reply. Instead, I crossed the room, made my way to the event coordinator near the dessert cart. He was a young man, maybe 30, dressed in a sleek navy suit, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," I said, voice calm, low. "Can I ask why my donor credit was renamed?" He looked up, startled. "I'm sorry?" "The platinum certificate. It listed C. Hamilton on display, but the original states Kayla Elise Hamilton. That's me." His face paled slightly. We were told to consolidate names, branding purposes, keep things consistent." "So, brand me invisible?" I tilted my head slightly, not blinking. He stammered, "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," I said, offering him a neatly folded sheet. "That's the copy of the original document. If it isn't restored to full display in the next 30 minutes, I'll be printing my own addendum and taping it to every door." His eyes widened. He nodded quickly, already moving toward the table. I stepped back, turned, and let out a slow exhale. You don't always need a mic to make a statement. Sometimes silence, held with enough tension, becomes a sword. A mentor once told me that, and tonight I believed it more than ever. They didn't need to clap, they didn't need to cheer, but they'd no longer walk past me like I was air. A quote drifted through my mind, Toni Morrison's words. "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." Tonight, I let go of the expectation that they'd ever give me credit willingly, and by doing so, I freed myself from needing it. As I made my way back toward the wall where I'd been standing, I heard a soft voice behind me. "You really did all that. Why would they hide it?" I turned. A small girl, my niece, maybe 10, stood there, eyes wide, confused. I knelt slightly, met her gaze. "Sometimes," I said softly, "people cover the truth because they're afraid of how strong it is." She nodded slowly, considering it with the quiet gravity only children possess. and for the first time all night, I smiled. My niece's question still echoed in my mind, even as I stepped back into the hallway. That tiny voice, honest, unfiltered, had cracked something open in me. I thought I had already run out of new ways to be stunned tonight. I was wrong. I turned slowly, re-entering the edges of the dining space just as the scent of crème brûlée drifted through the air. Sweet, heavy, cloying. I hadn't touched a single plate of food since I arrived. My appetite had disappeared hours ago. As I crossed the floor, eyes fixed ahead, Abarella intercepted me like a hawk gliding in for a calm kill. Her smile was soft, saccharine, practiced. "Oh, Kayla, since you're not seated," she reached out, touching my forearm lightly. "We could use a hand upstairs with the kids. Thought you'd be perfect for that." I blinked. At first, I didn't understand. Then I did. Her voice carried, just enough for others to hear, and sure enough, someone behind her laughed. She was always the quiet one, great with kids. No one asked if I was available. No one checked if I wanted to help. It wasn't a request, it was a redirection, a demotion in pearls and politeness. And then, almost on cue, a server passed me a small stack of toys, plastic blocks, a couple of coloring books, a juice box with a straw already bent. I looked down at them. My heart pounded, but I didn't show it. I smiled, faintly. "Of course," I murmured, mechanically accepting the items. From the corner of my eye, I caught a flash. The event videographer, his camera trained right on me. Perfect shot. The overlooked daughter, still so gracious, volunteering with the children. They've moved me from the edge of the table to the floor, I thought. And they want a photo to prove how sweet I look kneeling. I walked toward the nearby bench, set the toys down gently, and without looking back, turned away. My heels echoed as I crossed the marble hallway. My hands trembled now, not from sadness, but from fury wrapped in velvet. There was a mirror across from the grand staircase, an antique thing, gilded edges, the kind of mirror that had seen more lies than reflections. I stood in front of it, immaculate dress, controlled expression, rage under glass. "You're not here to please," I whispered to myself. "You're here to remind." My therapist once told me, "Don't react the way they're betting on." So I didn't. I stayed silent, not weak, strategic. I walked through the archway that led to the garden display room. The lights here were dimmer, the energy quieter. A wall of family portraits stretched the length of the corridor, placed on wooden easels. I paused in front of one, the Hamilton family reunion photo from 8 years ago. I remembered that day clearly, hot, chaotic, filled with laughter I had helped coordinate. But in the photo, I was missing, no, not missing, cropped. I saw myself in the original image, the edge of my blue dress, just the sleeve, but my face had been trimmed from the frame entirely. The caption beneath, "A legacy of leadership, the Hamilton family." It wasn't a mistake. It was edited. "Too bad you blinked in the original," Abarella's voice chimed from behind me. "Had to cut that one. Presentation matters." I turned toward her, eyes even. "So does truth." She didn't reply. She simply walked away. I returned to the photo and stared at it for several more seconds. Then I turned, walked back into the hall, and headed toward the donation table. A Sharpie rested near the edge, beside the thank you notes and suggestion box. I picked it up and returned to the photo. At the bottom, in black ink, I wrote, "Photo edited, real memories omitted." A few people nearby stopped, glanced, pretended not to read. No one said a word, but I saw it. The flicker of discomfort. The silent calculation, should we stop her? Immediately followed by the collective decision, let her have her moment. If they weren't going to remember me properly, I'd make sure they didn't forget what they tried to erase. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the image with my caption. Not for social media. Not yet. Just for me. For now. My feet carried me slowly to the grand piano in the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bench, letting the murmur of the reception fade into the background. The polished wood beneath my fingers was cold. I didn't play. I just sat. I remembered something Michelle Obama once said. When they go low, we go high. But sometimes going high means telling the truth out loud. And I remembered my father's voice, strong, steady. Don't be silent when it matters. No matter how many edits, how many redirections, they couldn't take away the truth I carried. They didn't give me power, but they made me find it. You know they're scared of you, right? The voice behind me was low, familiar, male. I turned slowly. It was Mr. Holden, our family's former legal advisor. He had aged since I last saw him, more silver at the temples, deeper creases near his eyes. Because you know too much, he added, and because you're not afraid to speak anymore. I leaned forward, voice soft but sharp. Good, I said. Let them be afraid. Leaving the piano behind, I moved deeper into the corridor, my footsteps muffled by the thick rug that ran the length of the hallway. Holden's words still sat on my shoulders like armor. They're afraid of you. It wasn't comfort, it was confirmation. I caught a few glances now, nothing direct, but no longer dismissive either. Some people weren't looking at me with pity anymore. Some had started to look nervous. That was new. I slipped into the library wing to avoid the buzz of the reception and clear my head. The air was cooler there, scented with old books and polished wood. I didn't come here to hide. I came here to listen. And the walls did not disappoint. I heard my name. Then a pause. She's not even in the real will. The voice was Aunt Viola's, sharp as ever. The other, Abarella. She was disinherited, Abarella whispered. I have the final version, signed right before the stroke. It's ironclad. I didn't move. I let the words land, one after another. Absence wasn't neglect, it was survival. I stepped around the corner with the kind of calm that only comes from certainty. They both froze mid-sentence. You have the final will? I asked. Abarella blinked, then smiled. Too fast. Kayla, I didn't see you there. Clearly. Viola stepped back. Abarella remained rooted. I heard you say something about a revised copy? She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of yellowed paper, treating it like a treasure map. This was signed 3 weeks before your father's stroke. He wanted the estate simplified. I took the paper from her hand without asking. One glance told me everything I needed. The date was wrong, the signature slightly off, no witness line, no legal notary seal. Funny, I said, holding it up. He told me the only thing he wanted to simplify was your access to his money. Roxalana's voice chimed in from behind me. Too light, too deliberate. What's going on here? Your sister's curious about the updated paperwork, Abarella offered, attempting to sound unbothered. I turned toward Roxalana, holding the document. Is this what you've been building your legacy on? Her smile didn't falter. Kayla, we're not doing this here. Why not? I asked. It seems here is where everything else has been happening, behind closed doors, in whispered corners. People were gathering. Not many, but enough. I suggest, I said evenly, that anyone interested in the truth have this document verified with the family's attorney. Abarella's face paled. The lawyer. He's unavailable tonight. Convenient. I turned slowly, making eye contact with each person now lingering at the library's entrance. There's a reason forged papers fade faster than truth, I said. The ink always bleeds. I left them standing there and walked toward the salon. The glow of polished wood and soft jazz greeted me. A tray of champagne glasses passed, but I didn't take one. I moved toward the magazine display at the far end of the room. A local publication sat stacked in glossy rows. The Hamilton Legacy, A Family Reborn. Roxalana's face smiled from the cover. I picked up a copy and flipped through. Page after page detailed the estate's restoration, the gala's purpose, the Hamilton Foundation's mission. But my name? Not one mention. My photo? Absent. I stopped at one paragraph. After her sister stepped away from the public eye, Roxalana Hamilton led the transformation of the estate into a modern symbol of generational leadership. That wasn't just an omission, it was a rewrite. I held the magazine up. Funny how history can be revised before the ink's even dry. Heads turned. Roxalana stepped forward, tight smile in place. That article wasn't about you, Kayla. No, I replied. It was written to ensure it wasn't. For once, she didn't have a follow-up. And then the shift began. Guests started asking questions, out loud, not just in whispers. Someone asked about donation records. Another wondered aloud why the foundation's name had never changed to include my father's actual instructions. One of the guests, a woman I didn't recognize, pulled out her phone and began typing. That's when I noticed the journalist, notebook open, observing, quiet. I didn't need to speak anymore. The room was starting to speak for me. I turned back to Roxalana. The more you try to hide me, the more visible I become. No one laughed, no one clapped, but no one looked away either. Later, I returned to the library, alone. I sat in the same chair my father used to read in, just beneath the oil portrait of his mother. My breathing slowed, not because I was calm, but because I was composed. Brené Brown's words surfaced in my mind. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. I wasn't trying to win tonight. I just needed the lies to stop winning. Their version of me was beginning to fray, thread by thread. A knock on the doorframe, a server stepped in, envelope in hand. "Someone asked me to give this to you earlier," he said. I nodded, took it. It was sealed in deep red wax, the Hamilton crest. I stared at it, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the sense that everything I'd been fighting might finally have weight behind it. "They tried to rewrite the present," I whispered. "But what if the past was never theirs to tell?" I stood near the edge of the ballroom, the envelope still in my hand, sealed tight with my father's wax crest. I hadn't opened it yet. I wasn't ready to. It felt like a loaded gun in a crowded room. One wrong move, one wrong breath, and it would all go off. I turned it over slowly, thumb grazing the edges as if it might speak on its own. But then Roxalana's voice floated through the room, calm, polished, too sweet. She had taken the podium again. Of course she had. She was always the one to deliver the final toast, to wrap everything in a bow of curated grace. The room dimmed slightly as guests returned to their seats. Crystal clinked. A hush fell. The moment had arrived, the one they'd been building toward all night, their finale. If they want a finale, I thought, I'll give them one they won't forget. Roxalana cleared her throat and smiled toward the crowd. "Before we conclude this beautiful evening," she began, "I just want to say a few words on what legacy means to the Hamilton family." That's when it happened. A sharp, deliberate tap echoed against the marble floor. Once, twice, the sound of a cane. Heads turned. Roxalana hesitated. Our grandfather, Eli Hamilton, rose from his chair, slowly but with undeniable authority. For a man well into his 90s, he stood with the weight of someone who had never been questioned. His voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "Before you all clap for a legacy built on silence, let me speak." Roxalana froze. I saw her mouth twitch, barely disguising the urge to protest, but no one interrupted him, not even her. He walked to the center of the room, his cane tapping in rhythm with his steps. He held a single sheet of paper, Kayla Elise Hamilton typed clearly across the top in bold. "You've all had your say," he said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Now listen to mine." The silence was thick. I didn't move. My heart thundered so hard I thought someone might hear it. Grandfather lifted the page. "You speak of family pride, of restoration, of what the Hamilton name stands for. But what you fail to acknowledge is who kept that name from crumbling." He looked directly at me, and I felt heat rise in my chest. Not embarrassment, but a deep, almost aching recognition. "This woman," he said, nodding, "poured more into this family in the last 10 years than any of you standing here clapping yourselves on the back." Gasps, shifts in seats. I could see the blood drain from Abarella's face. She reorganized the vineyard books during the IRS audit. She coordinated post-hurricane shelter logistics while half of you were vacationing in Europe. She wrote the proposal that secured the state grant for historical preservation, and she did it without demanding credit. He turned to Roxalana. "And you took that credit and made it your image." Then his voice lowered, solemn and sharp. "And your father once told me, the strongest in the family are the ones who say the least until they must speak. Tonight she speaks, and I stand with her." Silence hung so long it became a presence of its own. Grandfather stepped aside and looked to me. "The one you ignored," he said, "is the one who held you all up." Then he turned toward Abarella. "I watched you turn family into politics," he said, slowly, clearly. "I watched too long." The room was stone still. You could hear the slight fizz of champagne in a nearby glass. He turned to Roxalana. "You built an empire on a foundation your sister paid for. I'm done watching." He took a leather ledger from under his coat, the trust book. "I'm transferring co-ownership of the Hamilton Estate Trust. Effective tonight, Kayla has equal authority moving forward, legally and publicly." The room broke. A single cousin clapped, softly at first, then a little louder. Another followed. And suddenly the silence cracked open into stunned murmurs, applause, and confused chatter. I stepped forward slowly. No rush, no flair, just presence. I placed the sealed envelope next to the ledger. "For years," I said, voice steady, "I believed silence was safety. But silence also lets lies grow." I broke the seal. Inside was my father's final letter. Dated. Signed. Clear. To my daughter, Kayla. My chosen continuation. I didn't cry. I just looked at them. "You don't have to apologize," I said. "But you'll never silence me again." Roxalana's chair scraped back abruptly. She stood and walked out, heels clicking faster than she probably intended. A few guests watched her go. No one followed. Abarella stood, flustered. "This has been miscommunication," she began. But no one listened. A few people approached me, some with cautious nods, others with quiet respect, a few with guilt scribbled across their faces like graffiti. Grandfather returned to his seat. He didn't speak again, just watched me with the smallest nod of approval. For the first time in that house, I felt something shift. Not a win, not a loss, just something finally balanced. As people began to move again, a woman I didn't recognize approached me near the exit. "You knew this the whole time?" she asked. I looked at her and shook my head. "No," I replied. "I just stopped letting them tell the story for me." I reached into my clutch, tucked among tissues and backup lipstick, and touched the second envelope. The original will, untouched, still sealed, still mine. The final truth isn't for tonight, I thought. But it's ready when I am. The air outside the ballroom felt denser somehow, like the walls were exhaling after holding their breath for too long. I stepped into the hallway slowly, the envelope from my father still tucked into my clutch, untouched. The scent of gardenia drifted in from somewhere, almost artificial in contrast to what had just unfolded. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't posturing either. They were clustering. Whispers had replaced small talk. I passed a group near the coat room who immediately turned their backs when they saw me coming. Another group, this time distant cousins, gave me small, uncertain nods. Respect? Guilt? Maybe a little of both. Either way, I didn't need it. I wasn't walking like someone who had won anything. I wasn't floating. I felt no satisfaction. What I felt was gravity, heavy, anchoring. Truth does that. It doesn't lift you up right away. It sits on you first. Then it asks what you'll do next. Sometimes, I thought, you don't need to flip the table. You just need to pull out the chair no one thought you'd sit in. I needed air. I wandered toward the garden area, quiet and dim, where potted palms lined the stone paths. A little girl ran across the path ahead of me, barefoot, laughing, chasing a balloon. She stopped when she saw me. "Are you one of the maids?" she asked, blinking up at me, innocent and curious. I crouched to her level, surprised more than hurt. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm just someone they didn't expect to show up." A pause. A man standing nearby, an uncle, I think, overheard and chuckled nervously. "Kids say the darndest things," he muttered, sipping from his whiskey glass before turning away. I stood again, brushing invisible dust from my dress. I should have felt nothing. But I did. That question, simple, harmless on the surface, carried generations underneath it. Generations of being unseen, misfiled, misplaced. I left the garden path and found a hallway alcove tucked between the dining room and the side corridor. It was dim, half lit by a sconce that flickered now and then. I sat on the edge of a velvet bench, unclasped my clutch, and pulled out the original will. There it was. His handwriting. His name. Mine. His wishes. It wasn't legalese. It was love. Outlined with deliberate intention. I didn't plan on sharing it, not tonight. They'd had enough truth to choke on for now, but I needed to see it again, just for me. I closed it, slid it back into my clutch, and took a long, deep breath, one that felt earned, not forced. The window beside me creaked slightly in the wind. Magnolia scent drifted through, uninvited and familiar. It reminded me of summers before everything fractured, back when legacy wasn't a performance, but a quiet intention. When I returned to the corridor, I noticed Roxalana's tablet left carelessly on a side chair in the corner lounge. Notifications lit up the screen. One caught my eye. Family Strategy Group, 42 messages unread. Of course there was a group chat. I picked it up, just for a second. The screen was unlocked. Sloppy. Curiosity became justification. I opened the chat. Messages between Abarella, Roxalana, and a handful of others. The tone? Clinical. Strategic. Cruel. Make sure Kayla isn't near the front table. Crop the side of her out of the vineyard photo. She's barely in frame anyway. We'll blame tech if she asks about her segment. Say it was a timing issue. Get to Holden before she does. He knows too much. And then, the worst one. She has the will. We just have to keep her quiet long enough. I didn't gasp. I didn't fume. I took a photo of the screen, locked the tablet, and placed it back exactly where I found it. This wasn't an accident. It was orchestration. In the powder room, I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't fix my hair. I didn't blot my lips. I didn't straighten my dress. I let one tear fall. Not sadness, release. I whispered to my reflection, I don't owe them anything else, not even my anger. Audre Lorde's words came to me like a song I hadn't realized I needed. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. They didn't get to call me emotional anymore. They didn't get to weaponize my silence or my voice. Back in the hallway, I pulled out my phone and forwarded the screenshot to myself. Subject: truth, for when they ask. I didn't need to use it yet, but it was mine to keep. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I never had to lose again for them to feel like they were ahead. I'd stopped playing their game. And then, just as I reached the foyer, my phone vibrated again. A message from Quinn. Quinn, who had always stayed neutral, quiet, somewhere between alliances, until now. I read everything, it said. I think it's time someone else speaks up too. I exhaled slowly, a smirk pulling at the corner of my mouth. The door they closed on me? I never stopped knowing how to open it. I stepped out onto the rear veranda, the message from Quinn still glowing on my phone screen. The air had cooled slightly, but it wasn't the weather that made me exhale deeper than I had all night. It was the shift. Something in the house had cracked. Not collapsed, not yet, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. I walked slowly toward the edge of the patio, clutch in hand, heels steady on the flagstone. The weight of everything that had happened tonight sat with me, but it didn't crush me. If anything, it clarified something I hadn't known how to name until now. A server approached with a tray and offered, "Would you like a glass, ma'am?" It was the first time all night someone called me that. I took the drink, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Funny how one speech can turn a ghost into a headline." It wasn't about revenge. That would have been too small. This, tonight, was about record-setting. As I moved through the corridor toward the front foyer, I rounded a corner and paused. Roxalana and Abarella were standing beneath the grand chandelier, flanked by donors and old family friends. A photographer snapped shot after shot, praising them for their poise, their leadership, their grace. A server nearby tripped, just slightly, and a silver platter hit the floor with a sharp clang. Without thinking, I stepped forward to help him. I bent down, started picking up scattered silverware. Reflex. Habit. The camera flashed again. I looked up just as the shutter clicked. There I was, on my knees in the corner of the frame, hair perfectly styled, gown pristine. Behind me, Roxalana and Abarella stood tall, hands folded, teeth gleaming. No one offered me a hand. I returned the last fork to the tray, stood, and looked directly at the photographer. Even now, I thought, they'd rather me be useful than visible. I walked to the man with the camera. Calm. Measured. "Could you show me that last photo?" I asked. He hesitated, then held up the preview screen. I saw it. Clear. Undeniable. "Would you mind sending me a copy?" I added. "Of course, Ms. Hamilton." I didn't say why. I didn't need to. But as I walked away, I made a mental note. Let the world see what I've seen for years. I wasn't going to post it, not yet, but when the time came, it would speak louder than any lawsuit. My power wasn't reactive anymore. It was curated, intentional. As guests began filtering toward the exit, exchanging hugs and half-hearted promises to do this again soon, I heard a familiar voice, Maribel. "If her mother were alive to see this," he muttered to someone near him, "she'd die of shame." I froze, turned, walked directly up to him, calm, dead-eyed. "Funny," I said. "Because when my mother was alive, she was the only one who told me not to become like any of you." Gasps. Audible. Some even stepped back. Maribel blinked. It was just a joke, Kayla. You don't get to mock the only person who protected me when none of you did. Silence settled hard. Then someone behind me, someone I didn't even know, said, "That was out of line, Maribel." He said nothing else, just walked off. No defense, no smirk, just small. And for the first time, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. Maya Angelou came to mind again. People will forget what you said, forget what you did, but never forget how you made them feel. Tonight, I let them feel the discomfort of their own reflection. I didn't force it. I just held the mirror long enough for them to see themselves. After most guests had filtered out, I stepped into the garden one last time. The envelope still rested in my clutch. This time, I opened it, not to read it, but to fold it, respectfully, quietly. "I don't need this to prove anything anymore," I said aloud, the paper soft between my fingers. They built the house, but I built the backbone. And I wasn't leaving empty-handed. As I walked to the circular drive, the lights from the estate behind me flickered slightly in the dark. When I reached my car, I saw something tucked beneath the windshield wiper. I froze, then pulled it free. A small folded note, no signature, just one line. "If you ever decide to fight publicly, I'll testify." I read it twice. Then again, I smiled, folded it once more, slipped it into my clutch, and said, not quite out loud, not quite under my breath, "I'm not the only one who kept receipts." I walked the garden path slowly, the flickering lanterns casting shadows that danced around my feet. In my hand was the note Quinn left, folded once, still warm from the light it had caught under the windshield. I didn't rush to put it away. Instead, I held it for a moment, feeling its weight, its promise. Then I tucked it beside the envelope from my father and the screenshots I had saved earlier. All the proof in the world, I thought, and it fits into something as small as a purse. My heels clicked rhythmically on the flagstone, like punctuation, not to emphasize an ending, but to mark the completion of a sentence long overdue. I took a deep breath, not victorious, not relieved, just whole. Halfway down the path, I turned to look back. The house loomed behind me, lights still burning in the upper windows, voices soft and fading. Silhouettes of guests moved slowly through the halls, wrapping up their night, pretending normalcy still had a home here. "This house raised me," I whispered to the night, "but it never welcomed me." I thought about the first time I came back after college, how even then I felt like a guest in rooms where I used to dance barefoot, where laughter had once included me without hesitation. This place had grown colder with every return, as if the bricks themselves remembered who I was and chose not to forget who I wasn't. Now, though, I didn't feel exiled. I felt released. This place was no longer home or prison. It was just geography. You can't lose what was never yours. The words left me softly, almost kindly. A voice called from behind. "You forgot this." I turned. Roxalana was standing a few paces back, holding my shawl. Her voice was smooth but slightly off-pitch, like she was playing a part she hadn't rehearsed. I took the shawl slowly, unsure whether it was a genuine gesture or the beginning of another play. "You didn't have to do all that in front of everyone," she said. Her voice was almost gentle. "And you didn't have to do all of it in the dark," I replied. Her eyes dropped for a moment, then found mine again. "I didn't think you'd fight back." "That," I said, stepping just slightly closer, "was your first mistake." She didn't speak, didn't defend, just stood there, mouth slightly open, eyes searching for something that wasn't coming. I didn't offer it. She lingered, waiting, not for forgiveness, but for permission to be forgiven. "I'm not mad," I said evenly. I'm done. Her face fell, not because of the answer, but because of the distance in it. She wasn't being rejected. She was being denied access. That stung more. I turned and walked away. Forgiveness isn't always strength. Sometimes it's bait. At my car, I sat for a while before starting the engine. The night had thinned. Only a few cars remained. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just sat in stillness. A quote I had once heard Oprah say came back to me. True forgiveness is when you can say, "Thank you for that experience." I wasn't there yet, but I was far enough to not carry it home. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. "You're not broken," I said aloud. "You're rebuilt." Before leaving, I mentally revisited the night's moments. Who had stood, who had stayed silent, who had slipped away. Not everyone was a villain. Some cousins had looked up when I spoke. Some had texted quietly after the event. Quinn had crossed a line no one else had dared approach. That mattered. I wasn't going to burn every bridge. Just the ones no one deserved to cross again. Family wasn't a fixed cast. It could be recast. And I would be the one writing the invitations this time. I can redefine family, I thought. It starts with who I open the door for. Just as I was about to pull away, my phone pinged. A notification from a news outlet. Tag. The forgotten heir no more. Kayla Hamilton speaks. I stared at the headline. Then I smiled. They finally spelled it right. And with one flick, I deleted it without opening. 2 weeks had passed since the dinner, and yet the silence that followed felt louder than the entire night itself. I walked into the legal office downtown wearing a tailored navy suit and the same quiet determination I carried out of the estate. In my hand was the sealed envelope, my father's original will, now legally verified, intact, indisputable. I didn't ask to speak to anyone. I didn't need to. The receptionist glanced up, eyes widening slightly as she recognized my name. I nodded once. She pointed toward the conference room, where Mr. Langston waited. He stood when I entered. "Ms. Hamilton," he greeted, formal, cautious. There was a different weight in his posture now, one of someone who knew his job had changed overnight. There's a difference, I thought, between having a seat and knowing you own the table. I placed the envelope gently on the conference table beside the other versions. Abarella's, Roxalana's, all lined up like forged audition tapes for a role that had never belonged to them. Mr. Langston opened mine last. The seal cracked. He unfolded the paper, checked the signature, then checked it again. His eyes moved from the notary stamp to the typed details, back to the margins. He took a breath and looked at me. "This," he said, clearing his throat, "supersedes every version they've presented." "I know," I replied simply. He nodded slowly. "You are the legal sole controller of the Hamilton Estate Trust." I didn't smile. I didn't nod back. I just sat still, let it land, let it settle. He went on about updates to public record, the timeline of asset transfer, the list of entities to notify. I listened. I agreed. I gave my approval for how it would all proceed, quietly, truthfully, clean. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen counter drafting the press statement. No fireworks, no accusations, just facts. I have no interest in legacy. I have interest in truth. It was released the next morning. The fallout was quiet, but it was wide. Roxalana's endorsement deals were paused. Her face was pulled from a board she'd chaired for 5 years. Donors started asking questions no one had prepared her to answer. I didn't gloat. I watched. 2 days later, I drove to Abarella's house, not for confrontation, for closure. She opened the door, startled, hair still pinned like she had expected company. I handed her a manila folder. Inside, the photo of the cropped family portrait with my handwritten caption still visible. "I won't sue," I said. "I won't speak." I paused, holding her gaze. "But I will remember." She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to lie, but I turned before she could form the words. I didn't need to hear them. Some people don't deserve your revenge, just your absence. Back home, I walked into the office I had finally claimed as mine. A space with clean walls, open windows, and no inherited secrets. On the bookshelf were framed photographs, not of Roxalana, not of orchestrated moments, but of real ones. Me in the field, mud on my boots, standing shoulder to shoulder with volunteers. One image, front and center, was a portrait I'd taken myself. No edits, my face, fully visible, no corners cropped. The foundation paperwork was ready. I named it after my father, not to honor the family, but to redefine what legacy meant. Visibility for the undervalued. That would be our first campaign. Quinn had offered to help with board formation. A few cousins followed suit, slowly but surely. Redemption doesn't always come as a tidal wave. Sometimes it shows up as a hand raised in your direction after years of being ignored. A week later, an online blog posted an op-ed titled, "The Woman They Tried to Erase." I received messages from past donors, community organizers, and even a professor who once doubted me, now asking to collaborate. I agreed to one interview. 1. The journalist asked, "Do you have anything you want to say to those who wrote you out of the story?" I thought for a moment, then said plainly, "You can't control how people remember you, but you can control how you remember yourself." She smiled. I closed my laptop after that, let the silence return to the room. This time, it felt like mine. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened the leather-bound journal my father gave me the summer I turned 20. Inside the cover, in his bold, slightly crooked handwriting, he had written, "Your voice will outlast my name. Use it well." I flipped to the next page and wrote, "The Hamilton Foundation exists to restore what was denied, forgotten, or hidden from the margins to the middle." Then I closed the journal and looked up, eyes focused on nothing and everything at once. I didn't take back a seat. I claimed what was already mine.